Hello, everybody. We're going to be working on Chapter 16 this evening, and this will be the third of the chapters that we're covering on Java effects. And the focus tonight is both on multimedia and, more importantly, user interface controls. And I know that many of you have worked with either HTML and/or JavaScript and possibly PHP up until this point. And usually the thing that we think about um, in terms of form elements, most specifically, are what falls into the category of user interface controls most commonly. And so if you look at even the objectives for this chapter here, see how we have labels, buttons, check boxes, radio buttons, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Very, very similar, by the way, to the things that you learn when you learn your HTML. That when you're in that first HTML course, you learn about all the same types of form elements, sometimes with different names, but all those are all the basic components. Then you move into learning how to do JavaScript and PHP, where you write code so that when you do things with those form elements, you can do programmatic control of either the stuff that's going into those boxes or out of those boxes, or what happens when the button is pressed, and how is the data processed, and all that. So that's the big focus here. The multimedia is kind of a little bit of an add-on, and there are some catches with that, and I'm going to talk about that with the homework. And every once in a while, students will work on the homework that's associated with that and go, "Ty, I just can't get it to work like the book does," and they're absolutely right, because it won't work inside of Eclipse the way the book shows it. But then I get students that get clever, and here's the tip, by the way, before we even do the homework: you upload the multimedia file to Apollo and link to it in your home folder in Apollo. That's the workaround. And so it's kind of a way to actually pull in exterior resources too. So it's kind of a fun combination thing. The reason that is locked down, by the way, is for security purposes. So they've made it kind of a little bit more challenging. All right, let's get into talking about user interface controls here. And I'm just doing this straight from the book. I am using the 10th edition, by the way, so there might be some slight differences with the 11th, which is our official version for this class. But it should be, if my memory serves correctly, pretty accurate. If you're wondering where my 11th edition is, it's back at the office, which I haven't been to in quite a long time. So PDF works for now, especially during the pandemic. All right. User interface controls actually fall into what we call kind of a special category of a collection of these things. And you can see all the ones that they have listed kind of in this diagram here, which also match up real closely to what we have learned previously in HTML, for example. The HTML approach, of course, is to just simply put the objects on the screen. And that's kind of where we're going to start. And we have experience with that now in Java effects, because we've been, creating, cars and fans and boxes and, etch-a-sketches and tic-tac-toes and all those things. But these are, tools that serious developers use constantly, and that's why this chapter is important. Because in a GUI program, one of the main ways that a user will interface with the application is usually either through their mouse or with forms on the screen, sometimes in combination with the mouse. So that's pretty important when you start to think about what kind of things that you would use these elements for, right? Most notably when you start to put in the ability to enter text into an application, or maybe have a button click and then an action is happening after that button is clicked. And what action is actually happening, right? You can control all that here on a much more granular level than you can maybe with HTML. Of course, throw in JavaScript, well, then HTML can do a lot along with JavaScript. And if you think back to those classes, if you've already had maybe your JavaScript class, and you've already had your HTML class, and maybe already had your PHP class, and some of those I guess you would have had to have, but some of those you might still be taking. And what kind of stuff do you put in there, and why? What kind of actions do you take with those user interface controls? Well, one of the big ones is for programmers. If somebody's entering information into a program, you have to make sure that whatever they're doing is what you need them to do, right? So like if you're asking them for their name or the product key for their software, hopefully that's the information you're getting, right? Um, and so part of it is what we call validation. So that's a big thing that we're going to do. Um, all right, so let's start going through these kind of one at a time. They're going to show you some of the basic structures. The first one is just a label. And a label is just putting text up on the screen. Of course, they always have these UML documents here, which show you what the private variables and methods are that are built into it, how many different overrides you can do on the constructors. Um, and they give a couple of examples here. And really what they're showing you is that labels are just pieces of text that drop on the screen. All right, so the first thing that people say is, well, then why don't we just use text? Like we were doing it in the other chapter, right? Why don't we just use text? Well, the answer for that is because a label is considered part of this class of user interface controls. And when you bundle them together, when you group those controls together, they can function as a unit. And so they're logically associated just partially because of the class that they come from. And that's an important takeaway. Kind of in the same way that you bundle form elements on an HTML page inside of a form tag. The grouping tags inside of Java kind of have the same function with user interface controls. And the grand takeaway from that is when you can group things together, you can control them and program them together as well. All right, so that's a label. It just puts text on the screen. Next object is a button. And the button has, of course, its own constructors as well. So you can just put the text on the button, or you can actually add a graphic to it as well. So if you don't like the standard button, you could, you know, find a cool button graphic online and find a way to add it in if you wish. But I don't ever require my students to do that in these. Here's what some of the code looks like. We've worked with buttons already, so it shouldn't be too mysterious. But you can create something like this. Standard button. Another one is a checkbox. And notice how these are direct mimics of what we do in HTML. That is not by mistake. So you can do the same thing here. Checkboxes. And notice how there's a little box around them. Those are typically grouped together. And group together user interface controls that are checkboxes by default allow you to select more than one of those objects. The next one that they have here is an example is the radio button. Radio button similar to a checkbox, right? It's got that little dot in it. But usually when radio buttons are grouped together, they have this attribute where only one of them will be active when they're grouped together. So I can't select all three. I can't be red. My font can't be red, green, and blue at the same time. It can't. Well, maybe if it was a rainbow font, but technically speaking, it can't be any one of those, more than one of those colors at a time. So radio buttons typically are grouped that way just so when you click them, only one highlights. Checkboxes, of course, allow for multiples. One that we'll be using a lot is going to be the text field. And the text field is probably, I'm going to argue, the most important one, very simply because it allows you to put words on the screen. And that sounds really dumb, but that's critical, right? I mean, when you think about all the applications that you use on a daily basis, just username and password alone. I mean, how many times a day are you doing that? Well, even if your browser is filling it in for you, you're still interfacing with user interface controls like that. And so text fields are critical. And here's a really important piece about working with text fields in programming. Whenever a user interacts on the screen with a text box and types in something from the keyboard, whatever comes in from the keyboard, doesn't matter if it's a number, special character, or text, it all comes in as a string. So if I'm asked, enter your age, or how much money did you make last year, or whatever, how tall are you in centimeters? You type in a number, that's still a string. So when we pull that text into the program, and this is a really important step, it always has to be converted to whatever data type we need it to be within the program for us to execute it programmatically. And so if I need to do math with the number a user is typing in, I first have to get it, convert it to the data type I need, and then I can do the math. And that's a really critical thing. But you see the text box is just a typical little box that you see. There's also a text area, which also corresponds to the, HTML stuff that you've learned, where they call it the same thing. It's just a bigger box with rows and columns. And if it's big enough and it doesn't fit, there's scroll bars as well. And that can be a very useful little construct, because a lot of times you want to put stuff on the screen that is more substantial than just what would fit into a text box. And this is a great little way to do it. And yes, you can style these things. You can color them, backgrounds, borders, padding, all that stuff. You can do it if you really want to get particular about it. So a lot of people who are into doing like the CSS thing will say, well, I know JavaFX really leans pretty heavily on using almost the same exact CSS that we use in HTML, by the way. And you can even create a style sheet that you attach to the file, believe it or not. We don't really dig deep into that because I don't want the whole course to be about JavaFX, but it easily could be. But I want you guys to be aware of the fact that you can completely style these things, and I think that's really cool. And you should have read up on that, actually, in the previous chapters. All right, so I'm going to move on now. I'm going to jump down to the combo box. That's another one of these common application things. In HTML, we call this a select option drop-down box. And this works similarly, but here we call it a combo box. And notice how a combo box looks. It can have multiple options that come off of the combo box. So like here they attempt to like have a drop-down with multiple items in it. You have to create that, of course, inside there. And of course, you can look at that sample code when you get to it. The other thing is a list view, which is similar to the combo box, but it shows you what's inside of it, basically. And you can make it as tall or as big as you want. It also has the capability of allowing for multiple selections as well. So if somebody holds down their control key, they could select from more than one of these, for example. And that can be leveraged, once again, programmatically. So that's the list view. Then we go to the scroll bar, and we're not really going to play with this too much, but it's a possibility to, yes, have your own scroll bars, and then you can associate the objects of the scroll bar, the thumb, for example, with the position of the playhead in a video file, or a frame and an animation, all sorts of crazy things that you can do with a slider, if you can imagine. So that's a pretty useful one as well. The sliders are similar to the scroll bars, except you actually can apply mathematical values to the slider. This is also a capability that you see in HTML, by the way. And you can control the range. So here they show like these predetermined ranges, but the truth is you can choose the starting and ending points. And yes, these can also be styled. This has kind of been a lot more popular, I think, probably in the last like 20 years than it was when it first came out. But I think this is a really cool one to use as well. Now, that is kind of like the overview, by the way, of all the user interface controls that we're talking about. They do this case study here. So if you remember some of the tic-tac-toe skills that we were looking at before, and if you're really into it, you could start working on creating a tic-tac-toe game that actually interacts with you here. That's totally a possibility. So feel free to explore that. But then we're going to jump down to video and audio and talk about that real quick before we move on to our exercises. So the video and audio are present within JavaFX due to what we call the media library being pulled in. Audio and video both have one commonality that's pretty important, just like with animations. They do operate on a timeline. In many cases, mostly what we're doing here is with the same thing you would do in an HTML environment. You have something that's already pre-created, maybe loaded on a server somewhere or embedded in your file system. And it might be a music file. It might be, sound effect or little video blurbs. And most of the time, you're usually creating a container that will hold it, and then you're just pulling the resource in and utilizing it. Very similar, if you think about it, like the same way we pulled in images of the playing cards or the X's and the O's for tic-tac-toe. We didn't go to the trouble of creating those things. They were just a resource, and often in programming, especially when we're working with video and audio, we're doing that directly. There are some abilities, though, inside of Java to more precisely control the playback of some of those timeline-based things, because of the classes that are attached to it are a little bit richer than what you would get with HTML. Although I have seen some really clever people doing stuff with JavaScript in HTML and controlling those players. So usually the web world's not too far behind, but that's one of the main things. And remember the tip that I gave you in terms of pulling in a video or audio. One of the things that we will do is, instead of pointing to a resource, and I'm not sure where they're pointing to the file here exactly. For example, here they have an MP4 file, and I want you to notice how they're pointing to something on a web server, right? So one thing you could do is, if you wanted to put a video file in there, you could try this, and it'll totally work for you. But here's what I'm suggesting also when you do the homework that's attached to this, is put the file on Apollo and link to it the same way the author is linking to theirs, as opposed to linking to your local file system. This will work better and more consistently, by the way. Some of that has to do with, like I mentioned before, security issues, basically. They also have this case study here with the national flags and anthems, and kind of, the point is you trigger the drop down, you bring up the country, and then the music plays with it. So if you want to try a fun one, that one's pretty fun too. But it's not an assignment or anything like that. I'm just pointing it out. All right, let's move on to the exercises now. So I'm going to jump back over to the course shell. And you know what? I'm actually going to be smart here, and I'm not going to record the exercises into this video. So this video ends here, folks. That's chapter 16 mini lecture.